It's hard to remember what the world was like before the internet came into existence. There was a time where it wasn't necessarily a publicly available thing, and it wasn't until the 90s that it started to flesh itself out. I'm sure everyone watching this can think back when they were first introduced to the web. It was such an exciting proposition for most of us. But I'm sure many of us are starting to realize that it has some detrimental effects on our lives. Although I'm sure there were definitely different countries in the world that were concerned about the effects the internet would have on the population, Japan has a whole term to describe this fear. Heisei internet anxiety was a term to describe the impact that the internet would have on a global population from a psychological, social, and existential standpoint. This was also accompanied with several anime that touched on this fear as well as the fear of technology itself. This movement also gave rise to the anime Serial Experiments Lain. When discussing this series, Konaka is usually the sole figure that's brought up. Obviously, he's a big deal considering he's the writer, but Yasuyuki Ueda is equally important to his contributions to the anime. Not just the anime, but he oversaw the game as well, and the subsequent manga. He's also responsible for discovering Yoshitoshi Abe, the character designer for the anime. I'm most familiar with his designs in Technolize, which he stated he couldn't really do much in terms of designing the characters, but I still like what he came up with. I think the most striking things about his works are the way he incorporates colors like this image here. His art style is broadly appealing to mentally ill people online. I don't think I have to tell you how iconic his design is for Lain. She's pretty much become more iconic than the anime itself. She's become a symbol for weirdos alike. Unfortunately, this kind of ends up with the Silent Hill effect, where you probably have a lot of people who have heard of the show and the character, but very few people have actually probably watched it. Which is a shame because it's genuinely a great show with messages that sadly resonate more and more as time passes.
Weird. Layer 01.
Lain immediately grabs your attention with an opening scene featuring a suicide. The director Ryutaro Nakamura excellently captures the weight of Chisa's fall. The impact on her landing is one of the most brutal things I've ever seen in an anime. It doesn't focus so much on her body, but the objects getting crushed around it. It makes me wince every time I see this scene. There really isn't too much in the way of the plot for the first episode, and generally that can apply for a lot of the series. The show is much more focused on getting lost within its own themes. It's Konaka's trademark dense writing style. For those of you who are familiar with his work, you probably know that he's a horror writer first and foremost. He's even stated that he's a disciple of Lovecraft. But he honestly reminds me more of Thomas Ligotti. They both place the viewer in horrifyingly pessimistic scenarios while reality breaks down. Lain isn't really a full-on horror anime, or at least it doesn't really come to mind when horror anime is discussed, but the atmosphere of some of the scenes are almost certainly creepy. I mean, in this episode alone, the atmosphere is incredibly suffocating and almost has an alien quality to it. The visuals are trippy and off-putting. The music provided by Reiichi Nakaido puts the viewer in a dreamlike trance. It's not really helped by Lane's disposition. Her family are also very off-putting people. Even though they are in the house, they don't really help with the isolation. So, unable to socialize normally, she gets onto the net and, nothing bad could happen from a socially awkward person trying to get full access online, right? Let's just hope she doesn't end up making pretentious video essays or anything. We haven't really been able to sink our teeth into the substance behind Lane yet, and I really wanted to say that I find it a bit depressing that many people can't really grasp what Lane is really about. The trippy vibes and all are cool and good, but like any other Konaka project, it's trying to say a lot more. I've seen some critics give it crap, and it stems from a lot of the fans and their oversimplification of the series, of it being just a weird show that predicted the future. And I'm going to try to explain and analyze it to the best of my ability.
Girls. Layer 02.
Before I actually dive into the episode itself, most viewers have probably noticed some odd visual quirks taking place in the show. For example, the red specks in some of the scenes, or cutaway cryptic and mysterious text. These are obviously included to build more atmosphere into the show, but it's also a way of showing the blurring of the wired with the real world. The red specks could be a way of showing a bleeding effects of sort. I'd imagine the cutaway text were also a clever way to save on the budget of the show. The Wired has started to have its own effect on Lain, as we can see there are completely separate versions of herself. There's actually been multiple if you've been paying attention. Her normal personality is the shy version that we see out in public. Then we have the one that dresses as a teddy bear and acts more childish. Finally, the new Lain that's the complete opposite to her normal personality, that's brash. As the show continues, her identity will continue to become more muddled as she continues to interact with the Wired. It's amazing how Konaka predicted how people would be more comfortable to act rude online. All you have to do is spend 5 minutes on Twitter or really any online community to figure out how right he was. Not only does this open the discussion of how technology can cause us to lose our identities, but it touches on Lane's mental issues as well. You don't have to be a genius to figure out that Lain is a bit off. Not because she's some sort of base schizo or whatever the weird side of the Lain fandom wants you to believe, but because she has dissociative identity disorder. Now that I think about it, the show actually shares a lot in common with the themes of the movie Videodrome. The main character eventually breaks down and loses his identity as reality starts to be distorted by watching a sketchy TV station. This episode has plenty of unsettling imagery to match that movie, like the weird guy with the blue eyes that just stares at her. This scene always comes back to me when I think about the anime. It's just so creepy visually and audio wise. I can't mention episode 2 without talking about Siberia, one of the coolest hotspots in all of anime. There's actually a term named Siberia that refers to being immersed into the online world rather than the physical one. It's also a reference to the book by Douglas Rushkoff called Siberia, which also attempts to explore internet subcultures. There's a drug ongoing here called Excella. Well, it's technically not a drug, but it's traded like one, and it has some damaging effects. Boy, Konaka really likes the usage of drugs in his stories. The trade off for taking this drug is to speed up the brain to handle large data flow. Why anybody would want to have a deeper connection with the Wired when this kind of thing happens is a mystery to me. It will show how far people will go to alter their own identity.
Push out. Layer 03.
Psyche is a turning point for Lain as she continues to get sucked into the Wired. There is also a lot of symbolism in this episode revolving around spirals that perfectly portrays her helpless descent into the Wired. There's one scene in particular while she's surfing on the Wired and Lane's theme starts to play. The music almost drowns out the people talking as if she's literally getting lost within the internet. At the beginning of this episode, her family is not present, which hints that her family might not be what they appear to be. She does manage to sort of make a friend in the form of Alice, one of the only characters in the show that seems to somewhat act normal. For those of you who are familiar with Kanaka's work, you might know that he uses the name Alice a lot. I've never watched Digimon, but there's a character called Alice McCoy. He also has a project called Alice in Cyberland. This is a reference to Alice in Wonderland, of course, and he uses this literary archetype to represent characters falling down a hole, or in this case, getting lost in down cyberspace itself, which ties into the imagery of this episode of getting dropped down into an abyss of sorts. It paints itself as a cold and isolating image that is in stark contrast to what the creators of the internet probably had in mind.
Rezone. Layer 04.
The Psyche chip is having some serious consequences on Lain as well as the real world. This episode is titled Religion, which is based on the series theme of godhood. Chiaki J. Konaka was actually raised by members of the Anglican Church and that's where he gets the middle initial J from, as in John. Though he doesn't consider himself to be Christian, I'd imagine a lot of his interest in religious concepts started there. As people get integrated within the new Wired, our instincts continue to transition over. One of our instincts is obviously violence, which we get to see play out in the new mysterious game called Phantoma. The violence may seem fake on the player's end, but it often results in the death of people in the real world as well. I'd imagine this is where a lot of isekai got their ideas from. There's also another scene that implies violence with a guy getting chased by a little girl. I know this is supposed to be a scary scene, but it always makes me laugh because this guy literally fumbles with the key for like 10 minutes straight. I did find the audio of the girl saying gotcha pretty scary though. The excellent sound design of the show was provided by Yoda Soroka and the sound director Reiichi Nakaido. Thanks to these guys, they were able to establish one of the most uncomfortable auditory experiences in all of anime. There's also a new version of Lain that appears far different from the mouthy version that we're used to seeing in The Wired. She has a more angelic glow to her. This hints that Lain is becoming a more powerful entity within The Wired. The moment that really seals the deal is towards the end of the episode, where she explodes the Men in Black scouter or something. Seriously, what is that thing?
Distortion. Layer 05.
Mika is one of the family members that's interested me the most. As it's already been pointed out, the family is completely off, but Mika seems relatively normal in comparison. She's a bit rude and unlikable for a sister, but normal in comparison to Lane's mom. She doesn't really seem to want to do anything with Lain or care about her at all. Later in the episode, when she sees her mumbling in the middle of the street, she shows almost no concern for her. It's only until reality starts to crumble before her very eyes that she shows any concern for Lain. I'd imagine Mika's relationship with her family is also somewhat isolating for her as well. It's highlighted during the scene at the dinner table. The way it's framed with Lain and Mika on the opposite ends. A cup of water blocks their view, showing how detached they are from each other. Also, on the parents' end, they basically treat them like they don't exist. It's kind of tragic that they don't seem to reach out until it's too late, but the same could be said for a lot of families. So there's a hefty amount of symbolism in this episode outside of Mika, in particular evolving around Lane's stuffed animals. Her room is completely dark with this eerie orange sky peering through. Her room later on in the anime will begin to be flooded with wires as well. This comes into contrast with the stuffed animals lined up against her room. They're also pressed up against the windows as if they're trying to block out the outside world, like a barrier of sorts. I think it also shows that she's slowly losing her innocence. Her duality is also ever present with her talking to them like a child while simultaneously having the power of a god.
Kids. Layer 06.
The Wired is appealing to all sorts of people for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is the escapism element of it, so it becomes something very meaningful and impactful to children especially. The children featured in this episode are shown throwing up their arms at the Wired like it's a form of worship, or almost like they want to escape to it. Maturity is a subject that this episode also attempts to delve into. For example, Lain acts more maturely and is even shown wearing lipstick. There's also more evidence that her personality is starting to mix and collide with each other. We also learn about the terrifying Kids Project that shows the potential danger of subjecting the young to technology. Before that scene takes place, we get another one that features the Cheshire Cat, as Lain refers to it, which is a callback to Kanaka's fascination with Alice in Wonderland. The knights are basically playing around with the Wired like it's a new toy or something. And just like a child, they don't consider too much of the ramifications of how it affects other people's lives. It's a playground for lack of a better word. At this point, Lain has fully recognized her power, which is probably not a good thing for most people to have, But in her case, especially later on, she's a lot more considerate to others as opposed to the knights or Aerie will be.
Society. Layer 07.
Reality and the Wired continue to blur into one thing, and so does Lain's metamorphosis. Actually, metamorphosis is a pretty interesting term to use here. The word is even used in the actual episode. Immediately, the word brought to mind Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, which shares a lot of the themes with Lain. The blurring of reality and the character losing their identity smacks of Kafka's seminal work. What the episode is really focused on here is the Knights, or the Knights of the Eastern Calculus. Taking its name from the Knights of Lambda Calculus, which is a fictional organization in real life, are also shrouded in conspiracy and mystery. They also bear a logo that's very similar to the symbol used in Freemasonry. I just really like the Knights in this series. The way that they're handled makes them the perfect shadow organization. We only get snippets or vague ideas of who and what they are. I feel like Konaka's cosmic horror roots are showing up through here as well. They feel like a modern Lovecraftian cult or something. They're like Anonymous, except they're actually evil and threatening. The other group introduced here is the Tachibana Labs, and I've always really liked the Men in Black in this show. I can't explain it, but Carl and Lynn, more so with Lynn because Carl's a bit weird. Their presence just adds something to the show that I can't explain. I also really enjoy the orange lighting that's present through the Tachibana scene. It fills me with dread.
Rumors. Layer 08.
People have always spread rumors. I think for most people, it's a pretty scary thought of one potential person having your life in their hands. Thanks to the internet, that's more possible than ever. One mere exchange, one wrong word, one bad feeling, and your entire career could potentially go down the shitter. It's amazing how relevant this episode is today. It's never outright stated, but I assume that the evil Lain starts a rumor out of jealousy. Alice is taking attention away from Lain and decides to spread those rumors. Of course, this raises the question of which Lain is the real Lain. Masami Eri suggests to her that her physical form is actually a fake form. The ones acting in the Wired are in fact her true self. Many of our unconscious behaviors may lay dormant in the real world, but once consequences are stripped away, we're more free to show those traits. Serial Experiments Lain takes a lot from psychologist Carl Jung and his theory of the collective unconscious. Whenever Lain is also shown surfing the Wired, it's like a mishmash of different voices and topics colliding into one experience. In this episode, there's a group of mouths talking in all sorts of clothes, which are later replaced with heads of Lain herself. Everything is being transferred into one unified digital consciousness. It also calls into question Lain's sense of selfhood.
Protocol. Layer 09.
So, Serial Experiments Lain is a strange show, but this episode is really weird. I remember watching this through the first time and just throwing in the towel when it came to trying to understand what was going on. All these years later, though, I can properly appreciate Serial Experiments Lain and Konaka's writing. I have absolute respect for him and his challenging but thoughtful way of approaching his stories. So the biggest thing people are probably going to talk about are these seemingly out-of-nowhere segments about conspiracies worldwide. Whoever edited these clips deserves a raise or should start their own YouTube channel because they had me hooked. The music is also good during these segments and reminds me of the game. The first one featured is about the Roswell landing, and the narrator states speculation and rumors became history. Fiction and reality have always been blurred, even before The Wired, just on a smaller scale. They also serve as exposition pieces, albeit abrupt ones. There are other things like the Memex and the Schumann resonance mentioned, which helps show how the digital consciousness could be a thing in the future. It also finally name drops Masami Eri. You might have heard his voice interacting with her in previous episodes, but we get a look at him at the end here. His design has always baffled me every time I watched it. I'd assume that there's some symbolism with his flashy appearance. He sort of looks artsy, which reflects his transhumanist philosophy of moving past human limitations.
Love. Layer 10.
This episode is probably the darkest in the series. The first part really tugs at my strings, seeing Lain all alone in class and returning to her empty home. It's such haunting scenery, and it reminds me of Edward Hopper's paintings. It makes you want to give Lain a big old hug. Not only that, but the mass suicide of the Knights is horrific. The one where the kid's mom dies while he's playing a video game really gets to me. The title of the episode is Love, and it's sort of ironic considering the material here. It's really thanks to the ones that love her that she's able to resist Aries' advances. Alice in this show acts like a symbol of genuine true love and connection with people. She doesn't want anything in return, and generally goes out of her way to help Lain. Her family, at least maybe her dad, seem to love her, and I guess there's also Carl. Please stay away from playgrounds, Carl. We know you're on that list. All of these connections are more genuine and real than anything found in The Wired itself. The Wired only promises a false sense of connection. Now, it's obvious that Aries' version of godhood is a bit warped, and so is his understanding of love. It's not a true form of love, unlike the kind that Lain has experienced in the real world. There's an archetype that Lain starts to foster towards the end, like a Mother Earth type figure, whereas Aerie is more in line with patriarchal godhood. I've always gotten more of a devil kind of persona from him, considering his ego and charm. The way he whispers sweet nothings in her ear, it shows that they have two different approaches to godhood.
Photography. Layer 11.
It's a recap episode. A recap episode with a sick guitar track.
Landscape. Layer 12.
I don't think it would be fair to say that Lain is against technology or the internet, but it's a potential warning of what it could become. In this episode, you get a sense that it really wants to push the power of the real world. When Alice comes to visit Lain, it's her touch that brings Lain back to reality. It shows how powerful real connection can be for people, and it horrifies Aerie as he only believes in the digital. To him, The Wired is a vastly different experience, and he also states that you can just change your emotions on the fly. This makes sense in terms of a computer program that can switch on an instant, but humans can't do that. Aerie's breakdown in this episode is absolutely legendary. Once again, Konaka pulls from his Lovecraft inspiration and turns him into this monstrous being. I did make a comparison with him being the devil, and here I guess you could say he's like literally transforming into a demon. It's very fitting that his physical form returns to such an abhorrent state. After watching Technolize, I'm so used to Kanaka's work being on a dour note, but Lain ends on a much better note than I originally remembered.
Echo. Layer 13.
What do you do when everything in life is absolutely fucked to no end? Well, you just hit the reset button. Her sacrifice mirrors that of Jesus Christ. Her condition at the beginning of the episode also kind of reminds me of Jesus being crucified and strung up. She sacrifices herself for the sake of humanity and is later resurrected, again, very similar to Jesus Christ. There's also the fact that she ultimately sacrifices herself for humanity, even though they've essentially rejected her in the physical world. I didn't catch this either, but there's definitely some parallels with Gnosticism as well. Aerie is kind of like that flawed and corrupt demiurge, while Lain is the pure, uncorrupted being. The Wired would probably be a transcendent world, while the flawed material world is obviously reality. I've seen some people go as far to claim that Lain is a Christian anime, which I think is just way too far. Just because it includes a variety of topics about godhood and symbolism in it doesn't mean that it's religious in any way. Like I said, Konaka has stated that he's not explicitly religious himself. Otherwise, stuff like Evangelion or even things like Ergo Proxy could probably be labeled as religious. One of the most powerful quotes drops about halfway through this episode where the narrator says, "It never happened if there's no memory of it." This is another aspect of the show that's fascinating. It played around with it previously with Alice and the rumors surrounding her. What really defines us as a whole is our perception of things. If we believe something to be true, then it sort of becomes true. The entire reason people worshipped Lain is because of their belief in her. The perception of her godhood existed, so people thought of her as such. All that can be snapped away in an instant through the passage of time. People's perception of past events and media can almost become non existent, to the point where some bad actors may try and sway people one way or another in terms of their impact. Like how some YouTubers will look back at forgotten games that fell by the wayside for a reason and turn around and act like it was actually just a misunderstood masterpiece or something. Anybody can sort of reset the slate at any certain time. Although Lain is not as big as a lot of other animes, it's one of the most pivotal ones. I think the fact that as many people are going back to revisit the anime all these years later and realizing how prophetic it is says a lot. Its themes of godhood and the danger of isolation combined with technology are just so relevant today. Outside of that, there is just so much to take away from the show. Yasuyuki Ueda actually stated that he wanted the show to be kind of like a war of ideals between Japan and America, hoping that they wouldn't understand the show in the same way they did. But they found out later on that Americans had basically the same view on the series. Most of the time I've watched the series, I've never really been sure what to make of it. I could pick up on certain themes and whatnot, but I'm just in awe at how much there is to take away from Lain. Funnily enough, I don't see any other anime like Lain coming into existence, unless, of course, there's a reset.